Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Roger, for taking us through a journey of how the AI added into Sitecore products. It's definitely exciting for me to see AI getting so much well integrated into all that we see. So if you look back a few years, we kept hearing this phrase, again and again. Data is the new oil. Of course, that still remains to be true, but what we also have a new phrase joining the ranks. I'm sure you've heard this quite often already. AI is electricity, which basically means that you will start seeing AI in everything that you do, and you may not really realize or be aware of it. So when we look back at how tech has progressed over the years, this is in fact from a recent video of Vinod Khosla from his Khosla Ventures. He looks at how tech has changed over the years, and every 5 years there has been an improbable change. That's the basis on where it comes from. You look back at 1985, you had PC, you had the internet coming in 1995. Interestingly, both of these together is what gave you distributed systems and the next wave of scale products like Google and Yahoo's. Similarly, you had mobile coming in 2000, followed by the social media, the whole social media phase. All of these were in fact possible. When you look back at the history, you see that the internet and mobile may have led to this next set of social media solutions. Probably that's where you're looking at how do I get to the next phase, and then you have AI here in 2020. It needs to be seen what kind of platforms does AI lead to. We are all in the same phase where we need to build the next set of AI systems. So when you look back at how AI in fact did start off, realistically speaking, AI, the first set of AI conversations started in the 1950s. Of course, what we started seeing from our end was much later. The earliest experiences which we could have witnessed would have been ad recommendations in your Yahoo products. Yahoo was amongst the first few to have brought out targeted advertising, which means you get an ad which is very personalized and specific to your browsing behavior. Of course, this became possible because of big data, which means the availability of scaled information, the availability of data where you could have it build in these personal experiences became possible. And going forward, you also had other interesting techs coming into play. ImageNet was one where you had the volume of images coming in. You also had the deep neural networks. Those were all interesting points in time which gave you the AI that we see today, the frameworks that came into play. There is also this interesting point where NVIDIA, the GPUs from NVIDIA, which were primarily designed for gaming. The moment where someone realized that this could also lend itself very well to AI is probably very transformational in itself. Of course, you also had other landmark moments, the Transformers, the paper on Transformers in 2017. All of these are what really led to what we are seeing today. Of course, what we did end up seeing was that point in time in late 2022 when ChatGPT was released to the public, and all of us got a taste of what it means to be a part of this AI revolution. Needless to say, we are seeing AI everywhere at this point in time. It's fueling all of our experiences in many different ways. So when we look at AI in itself, the last year and a half, it feels like a long time, but it's just been a couple of years at the max when we started to see this explosion of models onto the scene. The lowest layer here is the foundational models, and that's where a lot of action is still continuing to happen. But interestingly enough, the models that we see here are what are leading to the entire ecosystem that is getting created around it, right? So all of the products that we create in and around it, all of the platforms that we build around it are also instrumental in the whole AI space. The foundational models, be it the GPT-4s, the Llama models from Meta, or you have all of the other models coming in, they are definitely key, but the whole ecosystem is also instrumental. Now, this is an infographic from Sitecore. It's a little dated, late 2023. The reason I picked it because it says a work in progress, which is technically true because the rate at which things are changing, the number of models that are coming out, it is definitely something which is constantly evolving and changing. Of course, we have a lot more models which have come out in the last few months, if not the last few days in itself. GPT-4o was the most recent announcement which came out. It is pretty extremely interesting in itself. And you also have a lot of other models from the different players. But interestingly, what we are seeing is that each of these is bringing in increased and tremendous increase in performance, as well as the ability to build different kinds of products as well. So yeah, which basically means that with multimodality, you're not just talking of text anymore, you're talking of other types of medium as well. Be it language, speech, vision, and we also have video coming into the fray right now. So when you look at the whole foundational models, the kinds of possibilities around it, we have, like we've discussed, we do have audio, video, image, vision, all of these covered within the models that we have. And the point then comes up, how do I build value from it? How do I use it in a manner that I can, create interesting products as well? So when you look at the approach, how do I go about utilizing the models, and when do I use it, when is it best suited? This is a rough guideline. Frankly, we're talking of certain scenarios where it's definitely best suited. Below to around content generation, we've seen a lot of interesting discussion from Roger. He talked in length of how we are integrating different ways to build content into your products, which basically means you are having the ability to use, the aided by AI kind of scenarios to create content, and that's definitely a very key use case for Gen AI, basically, which means that any place where you have content creation, be it image, text, or even different kinds of documents that you would need to create, all of these are prime areas for content creation, content generation. Similarly, you also have conversational interfaces, prime areas where Gen AI makes a big impact. There are other areas. Recommendation systems are also good with Gen AI. Of course, there are other traditional methods as well that you could use. Similarly, predicting forecasting is one area where you could very well use the traditional methods just as well. And this is a rough guideline, but primarily the goal is that you should be able to understand and identify where you could use Gen AI in the best possible way. Of course, a lot of this could change even as we speak because the models are getting that much more transformative and more powerful in itself. So moving on, looks like there's a problem with the clicker. Yeah, so the screens are on. Yeah, so let me go back here again. Yeah, so when we look at the solutions with Gen AI, so Gen AI primarily, we did talk about content generation. Automated conversations is again one important place where Gen AI use cases are prime. Similarly, knowledge mining is another area where we're seeing a lot of adoption around, primarily because if you have a vast volume of data, and how do I find that specific piece which is most important for you, specifically this works for a different kind of backgrounds. It could be different kinds of personas who need different types of information. So all of these basically means that I am having the ability to quickly find what you need, and that's where the knowledge mining system comes into play. Similarly, you also have a lot of scenarios around coding. I'm sure many of us here, the coders, the developers specifically, are using the coding platform, be it the GitHub, Copilot, or the others. I think it's become my best friend in itself. Uh, Seriously, those are definitely the places where you could use Gen AI. Besides that, education is another area where a lot of the use cases that we are seeing, how do I make the whole interaction with the end user very personalized, be it a student or the teachers. A lot of teachers are also using it for learning material. How do I create the learning plans for our schools, for the teachers? Those are interesting solutions for Gen AI. Besides that, of course, most importantly, the natural language interface basically means that your traditional interfacing techniques are no longer the only way to do things. You're also looking at how do I make it much more personalized, make it much more, something that primarily basically means that language is the new way to go, right? So you are using natural language, the way you prompt, the way you interact with your systems are primarily changing. And that's a key area for Gen AI, the solutions and the use cases around it, very much centered around using the natural language interfaces as well as enhancing experience. Enhanced experience, of course, comes in many layers. It could be the fact that you are interacting with the end user using language, or it could be much more nuanced in the sense that you integrate voice into the play, you could integrate different elements of localization into this play as well. So those are interesting aspects of how do I build solutions using Gen AI and add layers to it. And quite often it's not that we use one element of it and build a solution. It's different. It could be different ways of integrating different kinds of AI elements into building the end solution in itself. Of course, accessibility and inclusion is another area where Gen AI makes a big impact. This is definitely looking at how do I use the same kind of natural interfaces, how do I build that experience for a user, a consumer who needs to have access, inclusivity added in it. Different demographics are also another area where you could leverage and utilize the experience, building the kinds of experience that you want. Yeah, so this is an example of localized experiences. Closer home in India, we've seen Jugalbandi along with Microsoft Replete and AI Assistant. And primarily, this is offering access to the end users on the various government information. So this is a voice-based chat accessible to a farmer in a rural location in India. And the interesting aspect is the localization element built in, primarily which means that the end user can use this service in 10 languages, Indian languages, in a manner that is understood by the end user. Similarly, it gives a voice-based access. So all of this makes accessibility, the localization element built into the solution as well. We also have other options. How do I bring in personalization into the play? And we've seen a range of different personalization elements from Roger, and building on that, primarily hyper-personalization is a key element. How do I use Gen AI to make it hyper-personalized? And that's where the Sitecore products that you're seeing, be it the ability to deliver component creation, content generation, create automated mechanism for creating content, all of those becomes imperative. So that's where the products that you have inside code, the ability to personalize them, creating content, creating the assets in the manner that you want to meet the consumer where they are. And that's the aspect of hyper-personalization, which means you're able to not just create content, but create content which is very suitable and effective for the end consumer. So this is an important aspect of Gen AI, which means we look at not just building experiences, but building hyper-personalized experiences as well. When you look at the whole journey of building solutions, I'm sure all of us here have seen the different terms being thrown around. We, quite often the different solutions, how do I go about, which model do I create, what does large language model means. So a very quick briefer on each of them. When you look at, I'm sure all of us here understands large language models. Those are the frontier models that we are seeing, be it the GPT-4s or the Llama 3 models. So those are models which have been built, trained on a large number of parameters. On the other end, we also have small language models, which primarily means these are lesser than 10 billion parameters. Like, that's a rough guideline, but that's the premise on which it's created. And the idea with small language models is that it's more, being smaller in size, it definitely works well for the edge scenarios. Maybe it could be a phone where it could work out well. So those are scenarios where it works out well. Again, being a small model, it's also fine-tuned for a specific task, but it is a good option for a number of scenarios, number of use cases as well. Multimodal, we have of course seen the ability to handle different types of media. Tokens is again a term which gets thrown around a lot. Primarily means the language that the model understands. Just like we speak language, natural language, English, the machine needs to know it in numbers, and that's the tokenization that you will be doing. Again, I'm sure all of us here has heard the term hallucination, always wondering, is my model hallucinating? A good premise here is, of course, out of the box, a lot of models may have the may end up hallucinating, and that's where we're looking at grounding techniques. Grounding primarily means that how do I make my model utilize the data that I provide, which could be using techniques like RAG, retrieval augmented generation. I think there is a detailed session sometime today or tomorrow. You should definitely check it out if that's the area you're looking at. Similarly, there are other important aspects. How do I build guardrails around my model usage? And that's where you're looking at thwarting prompt injections, jailbreaks, all of these different kinds of attacks that we are starting to see. Of course, the journey primarily leads to all of us having some kind of a co-pilot in our pocket, some kind of a co-pilot which enriches different kinds of solutions. Quick briefer on the different Gen AI systems. Of course, all of us understand, and I've seen the claims around prompt engineering being the latest, job in town. Primarily, prompt engineering in itself can do a lot. The fact is that we're looking at how do I build customization solutions. There are primarily three ways to go about it. Three-step kind of a journey. Start with prompt engineering. There's a lot that you can achieve with just prompt engineering. There are different techniques which you could utilize in prompt engineering. If you have heard of the different ways where you can make the model not just respond to your query, but be very precise in the prompt that you provide. Similarly, you can also make the models respond back in a very step-by-step response, provide a very step-by-step response, which means that it is not just blurting out the first answer that it has, but it is sticking to in a very systematic manner. So those are different approaches which we recommend for prompt engineering. Of course, there is a lot of material on prompt engineering. You should definitely check it out to get the depth on how do you iteratively build it and make it more effective. So that's one area where you should start off, recommended to start off with prompt engineering. The next step would be to get into RAG, retrieval augmented generation. Again, the ability to ground it on your data means that you're getting the richness that you would need, the kinds of responses that you would need. Last but not the least is fine-tuning. Again, this is not something a lot of end users would need to do, not something you would need to do most often, but that's surely an option that's available, which means if you are looking at maybe adding a new task or a very specific kind of scenario that you need to address, that's where you're looking at fine-tuning kind of adoption. So when you look at language models, I mean, what exactly is it, right? What exactly is a large language model? This is an analogy of a language calculator. So primarily we are saying that when I provide a query, when I given a query, I combine it with a prompt, right? And the prompt can be very nuanced. The more precise my instruction, the more better the response will be, right? The more accurate or more closer it will be to what I expect it to be. And that's where a lot of the hard work goes in, making the prompt to be as precise, as instructive as possible. And the input along with the prompt, of course you can add retrieval into the process, and that gives you the output. That's where the LLM is processing the the query along with the prompt that you've given, and that leads to the output. LLMs being probabilistic models basically means that it's trying to identify the next best response for you based on the query you give, based on the prompt you give. So precision is again very key. The level of detail you provide in your prompt is key. And that's where a lot of the work that we do in prompt engineering fits in. The more time you spend on making your prompt that much more effective is important. In fact, there is a list of different techniques. Those interested can check it out. Many different websites which are covering it, many different papers which talk about it in detail. Primarily, the key element here is use technique, each of these techniques, and find the one which best suits your need. Retrieval augmented generation primarily means that you are grounding it on your data, so you can provide data that you have. So if you have, as an enterprise, if you have a large volume of data and you want your systems to be querying or responding based on the data you provide, and that's where RAG comes in. Again, many different techniques around it, many different ways that you could utilize RAG, vectors. We heard references of vectors, vector embeddings. So all of those are different techniques that you could utilize and make your experience that much more richer, and primarily the responses that you get in the process are closer to what you desire. So that's the RAG process, retrieval augmented generation. So we've covered prompt engineering, we've covered RAG. The last one is fine-tuning. Like we mentioned, this is something you wouldn't, primarily, most likely you wouldn't need to do in the LLM world at least. In the LLM world, you would probably not really need to do fine-tuning, but the goal of fine-tuning is that you provide a curated data set, which means you are tuning it for your specific need. This is very specific to your solution, specific to your requirement. So that's the journey. How would we looked at use cases, we looked at the different models, and we looked at what kinds of scenarios are probably better suited for GenAI. Let's look at a typical scenario. Again, this is at a very high level, 1,000 feet kind of scenario. How do I go about my journey of not just envisioning, but taking it all the way to production? We start with identifying the foundational model which best suits our need. We go on into the prompt engineering phase. Fine-tuning, as you mentioned, is optional, not something that many of us would need to do. We then move on to evaluation. This is again an important phase where a lot of energy needs to be spent. You need to spend a lot of time and energy on this area as well, because this is where you are understanding what is my requirement and ensuring that the results that I get, the outcomes that I get are indeed in line with what I need. That's the evaluation phase. Basically means that it could be iterative, where I'm going through cycles of prompt engineering along with the RAG part of it, ensuring that I'm getting closer to where I need to be in the process. The final two stages are where you're really taking your models into a production scenario, inferencing and monitoring. Inferencing is where you're actually using the model. Sometimes you may not even realize it if it's embedded into your products, like it's embedded into many of the solutions or products you're using. You may not realize that you're actually using a model under the hood. But that's primarily an important phase where you are taking a production, taking a model out of your dev setup, your sandbox into a production environment. Monitoring is of course key in itself. So we did talk a lot about the different points of Gen AI. An very important aspect and element of any AI solution is responsible AI. It is in fact the bedrock of all the solutions that we create and build. And the guidelines that we have, the tools that you have are important to use. There are different details around it. It could be the transparency that you provide to your end user. The fact that you are highlighting that this product has, is using AI under the hood. That could be one element of it. The ability to handle different kinds of biases and fairness elements. Those are important as well. So responsible AI is extremely important, and important to think through the products you're creating, think through and understand the impact that it would have on an end user as you go through the journey. Utilize all the possible tools around, ensuring that you get the kinds of adherence to responsible AI that you need. Yeah, so I put this in the last point because I know everyone looks at AI and the first thing that pops in our head is all this is good, but will it take away my job? Right? So that's kind of where we are at this point. And this was a very provocative headline from a very recent newspaper, Economic Times. Interestingly, the paradox is true. It is both probably sometimes killing some jobs, but at the same time creating that many more. But one thing that I've seen a lot of the AI experts talk of, and there's kind of consensus on that point, is that it's not entire roles that will be taken away, but it's parts of roles, some tasks that will get automated, which could mean that your specific role is going to get that much more productive and that much more efficient. Right? So that's the consensus across the forum for most of the AI experts, that it's the task that you have, subtasks. If you have 10 tasks in your role, probably 3, 4, 5 could get extremely efficient, automated in some form or the other. But the roles, most of the roles are going to be intact. What it could mean is that you have fewer such roles. If you had 10 earlier, you might need fewer of those. But primarily it talks of how tasks are getting automated and not necessarily many roles in itself. So that's the premise that a lot of the AI experts are putting forth. Of course, this is an World Economic Forum titled article from a more recent publication. Primarily talks of how throughout history we've gone through this journey of looking at tech with suspicion. We always wonder, is tech going to take away my job? And in each time and again, we have seen that while it does replace certain kinds of roles, it does create many more new roles. And it's imperative in that sense for us all to invest time in skilling ourselves, understanding the new tech, being a part of this whole AI journey as well. Yeah, so that was primarily what I had. I mean, of course, it's yet to be seen how things go forward, but the general consensus is that each of us needs to step up our game and get ready for AI revolution. AI in the future, this is something we're already seeing, applications of foundational models. We're definitely seeing that all around. It's going to get that much more accelerated for sure. Similarly, agentic workflows is something that's already started, early phases, but there's a lot more happening there. The multi-agent systems, which means that you have agents which can do many different tasks and build automated end-to-end workflows around it. Very interesting areas. Will be interesting to see how things go forward there. Spatial intelligence is also an area where a lot of work is happening. You have seen the robot which can pick trash and do multitasking, different kinds of scenarios. That's where it fits in the ability to understand spatial as well as visual aspects of the your surroundings. So yeah, interesting new developments in AI. It will be good to see where we are, maybe 10 years or in the next few events that we have, we will have a different experience in itself, right? So yeah, the bedrock again is interpretability, explainability, the fact that with the different kinds of regulations coming in specific industries where we need the ability to understand what are the different decisions, those are going to be extremely important, and there's a lot of work that's happening in the research community on those areas. So yeah, I didn't want to end my session on one note. AI could be overpowering, but we should let it empower us and not overpower us. So the goal is for AI to empower us. Yeah. Thank you.